Welcome to the Trumpet of the Last Few Days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
And I'm Robert Farrar.
And I'm Joshua Farrar.
And as you can see, we've all managed to make it into the same country at the same time.
Somehow.
Why the delay was so long.
Well, shall we go forward and look at the various this madness that seems to be encroaching on the society at large?
No. Let's pick a society. Let's pick Canada.
You want to pick Canada? Okay.
If we're talking about madness encroaching on society at large, it's basically just every plot of, man, what's the guy who wrote the Necronomicon? I'm forgetting his name. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft.
Well, let's talk about the truckers in Canada.
Who would like to start us off?
Go ahead. You now have the focus.
Okay. Well, in Canada, for those who have been living under a rock, although admittedly it is Canada, a lot of people don't hear about Canada. Canada's had some of the strictest measures possible for the pandemic, and they decided that they were going to require all truckers to be vaccinated. Now, whoever thought that was a good idea should probably be fired, because truckers are the lifeblood of the American economy across all of North America.
Well, when you take and think about it, though, they've besieged the Capitol, honking horns during the daylight hours, and now the courts have come through and said they can't legally do that anymore.
They've also done such controversial things as inflating bouncy castles and picking up trash, and even scooping ice out of people's driveways. It's a really tyrannical protest, and have had such anti-vax slogans as "Freedom for Canada."
Well, yeah, that is a major issue after all. Canada's never been real big on freedom. They didn't get a constitution until the 1980s,
and then they made a garbage one.
And then the constitution, and to get it to pass, they had to take and write in special clauses into the constitution that enables them to take and nullify the constitution.
I just realized a major flaw in our setup here. I'm not going to be talking a lot because I'm going to be having too much fun playing tech guy.
And yes, Josh is controlling all our cameras.
All of our cameras. Our giant turtles.
Fire-breathing.
Flying
giant turtles. Gamera. But when you stop and think about it, they have no freedom of speech. So when they go through and they say, okay, you can't legally do that. You can't legally throw a protest. Then that puts all the protesters against the law as a crime against the government.
The problem is the truckers have basically managed to shut down the border crossings. And Canada imports a lot of food from the United States. A lot of food from the United States.
Almost like frozen ground isn't a very good place to grow crops.
Huh, yeah. Funny thing about that.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? But with that being the case, also, they are so worried about them honking horns. They ought to be worried about the fact that if they don't deliver goods and services, Canada will starve.
Which means they should capitulate. But when you fight tyranny, tyranny fights back.
Yeah, I halfway expect them to call in their version of the National Guard next.
Well,
the Mounties?
they've already been threatening to bring in the Mounties, and the police are doing a crackdown, kind of, but it's not enough for them to put the protest down. Nor should it be, no matter how far it escalates. The truckers need to dig in.
Yes, then they need to be, and then you've got the fact that now, what's that money collecting program?
Oh, GoFundMe.
GoFundMe's stolen $10 million from them.
Actually, no. They tried to steal $10 million from them. They failed. And were forced to reimburse all of the money.
What happened?
Oh, people kept threatening to contact their banks and force the banks to basically nullify the transaction at GoFundMe's cost.
Yeah, that would do it. I always thought that was the best choice, because if they all took and did that then GoFundMe would have to pay $35 for every canceled transaction. And being most of the transactions were $5 and $10 transactions, they would lose a lot more money than what was donated in the first place. We're not talking about a little bit. They're not even just matching the funds. We're talking.
It's like 30 times.
Yes. So it would have been the best thing, because it would have shut GoFundMe down.
Well, GoFundMe is going to lose money anyway, because their reimbursal policy is a full reimbursement at their expense.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they wouldn't lose as much as if the banks were to do it.
Yeah, because the banks, not only do you give a full reimbursement, they penalize GoFundMe.
Yeah.
$35 a pop.
There were also several prominent lawyers who were promoting suing them for unjust enrichment and other legal theories.
Well, misappropriation of funds is one thing they should have been charged with, because what they're doing is embezzlement.
Well, no, because they're not pocketing the money.
If I take money from you, if I've got access to your bank account, and I take your money and I give it to somebody else, that is a misappropriation of funds. But it's also classified as embezzlement, because I have taken money that I don't have the authority to deal with and moved it where I want it to go instead of where you want it to go.
No, because they did have the authority to take the money in the first place.
They didn't have the authority to take it from the truck drivers.
No, they didn't. But they already had that money. They didn't. It's not quite the same there.
The very process involved with this, and it's going to take me a while to get used to all these cameras.
No kidding.
Normally we just have one camera we have to look at. Now we've got cameras scattered throughout the room. But
well, that's the blessing and the curse of upgrading from glorified Discord calls.
Well, we did start out with Discord calls, and now we're more of a studio setup and without the full studio.
Pseudo studio setup.
Yeah.
Although this is going to make editing a lot harder for me.
Funny thing about the term pseudo is it literally means false or fake.
But right now you also have the fact that in our country, Biden keeps running up against the law. He wants to take and rule in a tyrannical fashion, and the courts keep telling him he can't do it.
But he doesn't quit.
No, he doesn't quit. No matter how many... He's never won a court case. And he still keeps doing it.
Actually, that's not true anymore.
Oh, it's not true anymore?
No, he won the Medicare mandate.
Okay. Actually, that was a half win, half loss.
It was still technically a win. They still upheld it in the end.
But as you look at what everything that he's doing, and he's blaming society for his own bad policies. He says, oh, it's the people's fault that the gas prices are going up.
Never mind the fact that he immediately banned fracking, stopped selling leases for government land, or...
Well, yeah. When you think about him shutting down the leases for government land, his banning of fracking, his shutting down pipelines, and his telling the fuel companies that, hey, we're going to shut you down. You're going to cease to be. And think, well, why would they bother raising their prices?
It's the price of doing business.
And then on top of that, they've been following this wag the dog script with Russia.
Yes.
Where, for any member of the audience who doesn't know, there was a movie that came out. I don't know how old it was. I've never actually even seen it, but I just heard about it, started hearing about it recently, called Wag the Dog. And basically it's about a president who, in order to distract from their failures on the home front, starts a war. Which is exactly what the current administration is trying to do with Russia. Russia has a lot of problems on the home front and isn't really keen to start a war with the most powerful nation in the world. But
the thing about it is, when you're at the verge of having a war with China, do you want to take and draw in a war with Russia?
Well, especially since this whole debacle's drawn Russia closer to China. So great, now if we pick a fight with one, we pick a fight with the other. Two of the most powerful countries in the world.
And the whole reason why this whole issue's even an issue is because of bad policies by old presidents.
But one of the issues that's coming up, and this was actually a problem that came up during the Trump administration, though Trump wasn't really intimately involved with it. The State Department was, and that was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia into Eastern Europe. Actually into Western Europe, because it goes all the way to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And the State Department, Trump's State Department, desperately wanted to block that pipeline. It ended up getting approved anyway and completed. Now they want to shut it down. If they do that, you know what happens to oil prices? Right back up.
Well, especially being we buy 75% of Russia's oil.
And the rest is bought by Europe, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna hamstring our allies as well.
Well, it really, why Germany's been so closed-mouthed about this whole issue is they get all of their oil from Russia. The reason why Germany's been so closed-mouthed about all this is because they get all their oil from Russia. And the Democrat Party in office has been pushing that we take and follow Germany's example and be like Germany when it comes to fuel policies. But if we become like Germany on fuel policies, then we open ourselves up to where Russia could cut our throat by just shutting off the taps.
Which is why Germany's very keen not to start a war with Russia. They know what's at stake. And the rest of Europe is currently going through an energy crisis. Well, right now, an energy crunch, but let's be honest, it's just the start of the crisis.
But if we take and we look at we were fuel self-sufficient when Trump got out of office. And now we are fuel dependent on foreign countries. That is a dystopian scenario to where nothing can go right when foreign countries have the ability to cut off the spigots and shut you down.
Well, remember why Japan went to war with us in World War II?
Because of oil.
Yeah, because we shut off their oil supply.
Mm-hmm.
And desperate people do desperate things.
Yeah, desperate people do desperate things.
So if we, because Western Europe's oil supply to be shut off, we're basically forcing them into a war.
Yeah, a war with us.
Potentially. A war with someone. Either they go to war with Russia to restore the oil supply, or they go to war with us and side with Russia to restore the oil supply.
And the thing about it is they're talking about sending in NATO forces to fight Russia to defend Ukraine, and Ukraine is not a member of NATO.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and NATO, the leaders of NATO have openly stated they don't want Ukraine.
Yeah, they don't want Ukraine in it. And it comes down to the fact that NATO's purpose was to limit the expansion of the USSR.
The USSR is dead.
The USSR doesn't exist anymore.
By the way, for the audience, the reason why NATO is important for this, because I know it just popped up in the discussion, is this whole thing has started because some politicians decided to start pushing a narrative that the Ukraine should join NATO. And of course, Russia doesn't want that because NATO is inherently antagonistic toward Russia.
Yeah, it's in its its written documentation for its reason for being.
Yeah. And basically, the way the narrative is going, the way it started is Russia wants, according to the U.S. politicians, Russia wants Ukraine. It wants to conquer Ukraine. So, the NATO should expand into Ukraine and defend our interests there. The interests of which are
with interest
are money laundering for our politicians.
Yeah, they are, it has been taken. It is Ukraine is a major source of criminal activity, and specifically criminal activity with crooked politicians within our government.
Yes.
Now, the Russian pipeline that has been such an issue that Trump and Biden and Obama have been arguing about for so long, and many others, runs from Russia through Ukraine into Europe.
Into Germany specifically.
Into Germany specifically. Well, if Ukraine wanted to, they could shut the oil spigot off.
Yes, they could. But they'd lose all friends in Western Europe if they did that.
Not if they blame it on Russia.
Well, okay. So, interesting thing. In the U.S., our current administration was claiming that there would be a false flag initiated by Russia. And that would be the instigator of the war. But of course, since Russia has no actual reasons to to invade Ukraine, because they have a bunch of problems at the home front, and they're making a lot of money off this pipeline, the false flag has never come. And if the false flag does come, it very likely won't be a Russian false flag.
It'd be an American false flag.
Exactly.
There's already
There's too much money coming down the pipe.
Yeah, there's too much money coming down the pipe.
There's already evidence to show that the CIA has been doing some false flag operations in Eastern Europe already, and in so doing are handing countries over to Russia, right and left.
The funny thing is, though, and now I forgot where I was going with that. I had a thought lined up, and now it's...
The funny thing about false flags?
No, not about false flags, but about that whole Russian-Ukraine situation. Oh, yes. So, the Washington Post, the fake news that it is...
Oh, man, if I did that, everything would get so much easier. Go on,
So, the Washington Post, the fake news that it is, actually ran a live update on Russia invading Ukraine, even though it never happened. They declared that Russia had officially invaded Ukraine, which makes me wonder, what did they know that didn't happen? That they thought should have happened, who are they talking to? Are they like the New York Times that has a direct pipeline to federal agencies?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Washington Post definitely has connections with the federal agencies. There's no doubt about that. They've got people in the federal agencies that they're paying.
Because it's been proven the New York Times, with this recent Project Veritas situation where they raided the home of the head of Project Veritas and took his stuff, with the New York Times writing an article basically as soon as it happened, with no time in between, meaning that the article had already been written, shows that it has direct ties to the FBI.
Yes. They are a mouthpiece for the false information coming from the traitors to our country that exist in the FBI and the CIA.
Yeah.
We know that the communists have infiltrated both organizations, and let's face it, the FBI has always been a questionable organization when it comes to doing illegal activities in our country.
Well, just look at J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, and we find that the CIA commits a lot of things that would be illegal here overseas.
Well, so not that long ago, there was an uprising in Kazakhstan. And admittedly, most people, I'm sure, are just like, who cares about Kazakhstan? Well, there is a country that cares about Kazakhstan.
It's probably Kazakhstan.
Us. Kind of. You see, Kazakhstan is a lot like Ukraine. It's another corruption operation for the U.S. Believe it or not, Biden, at one point, not only did he meet with Ukrainian oligarchs, he also met with Kazakhstani oligarchs.
Well, they're right next to each other.
No, they're not right next to each other. Not even close to each other.
Aren't they?
No.
Okay.
No.
Ukraine is in Eastern Europe. Kazakhstan's in Central Asia.
Okay.
But Kazakhstan is a actually very large country, sandwiched between Russia and China. And they have it's a cesspit of corruption. That country is, just like Ukraine.
Or Belarus.
With the Mos Eisley Cantina.
They have, as their political structure, they have a unitary parliamentary republic, which is usually just another name for their communists.
Well, when you take and you look at the overall way they do things, yes, they're communists. And Russia is communist, even though they deny the fact. China is communist. There's a big communist bloc there.
But there are a lot of legitimate reasons, like I said, for a revolution in Kazakhstan. However, with the way that the recent one operated, it had all the marks of being a color revolution, which is another name for a CIA-instigated revolution. And there's a history when it comes to CIA-instigated revolutions in countries around Russia. They tend to fail. And this one was no exception. Not only did it fail, but like most of the other color revolutions around Russia, it actually ended with them becoming a Russian puppet state.
Well, speaking of puppet states, Belarus has been moving illegal immigrants from Iran up through to Poland for a long time now. And finally, various European countries have taken and started moving forces to the Polish, Lithuanian, and I can't remember the other countries' borders with Belarus. Now, they are directly those European countries are in direct violation of the policies of the EU by doing so.
Which is why Polexit needs to just hurry up and happen. Poland needs to get out of the EU.
Because while Russia actually runs Belarus.
Yeah. De facto.
But the Germans and French are standing in opposition to
I can't pronounce that, but whatever that word is, combined with Pole should be what they're saying rather than Polexit.
Josh,
Polexit's a stupid name.
Josh, pretty much no one but Poles can speak Polish.
Exactly the point, because it's only relevant to really them. I cannot pronounce that word.
But still, you got people from the United Kingdom on the Polish border. You got people from various other European countries there, and you've got Germany and France saying, "Oh no, you can't take and defend your borders." It's kind of like the Democrats here telling us we can't defend our borders, but don't anybody try to come into the country without being vaccinated unless you're an illegal alien. Then we'll take and give you the red carpet treatment.
I really hope Zemmour wins the French election, because then France could pull out of the EU, and the EU will just combust.
Well, the EU. This is something I said back when they were first discussing it. Was that the EU was a means and a policy that France was using to try to reclaim world dominance. And it backfired on them. Because it turned around and made Germany dominant again.
And if anybody knows anything about Germany, they're very quick to return to their roots. Especially in this pandemic.
Yes, they are. Very quick to return to their roots. National Socialism quickly arises. Or even before that, the Second Reich?
The Second Reich, yeah. Second Reich, then Third Reich was the National Socialist.
Yeah, Third Reich was National Socialist, but when
The Second Reich was the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah. Before that, you had the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic was not big on freedoms either.
No.
It very much...
Sounds like it was very big on Weimars, though.
It was very, very much in line with the Prussian heritage of... Well, really, because Prussia was the one who united Germany, and it was the prevailing culture, but it was a very strict culture, to put it softly.
Well, freedom is more worldwide is the exception, not the rule. That's one of the things about these globalists. They want to take and make all countries the same, but they don't want to make all countries free. They want to make all countries dictatorial.
Yeah.
When President Bush was in office and going through and saying that that he was establishing a new world order.
That's where that buzzword came from.
Which is funny because it's primarily used to apply to totalitarians, and a lot of people had convinced themselves that Bush wasn't a totalitarian.
Yes, but it is a buzzword. Well, when we think about the way the Germans function, and even the world globalists, the notion of becoming a globalist is a madness. And the millennialists in the religious world have been worrying about a one world government for ages. And here we have a president that when he came into office, said he was establishing a new world order.
I don't know about the whole globalism thing. I am a firm believer that globes are better than maps.
But really, when you stop and look at the progressive movement of the 1800s, their purpose was to establish a one world government. That's why the League of Nations came into existence. It failed because America refused to join it. Then when it came down to when they decided, well, we'll do the United Nations. Well, the United Nations has no authority over the individual countries, but it thinks it does, and it dictates to them. And we have presidents that say we should take and put their rules above our laws. Most of the so-called war crimes...
You could say they're in league with other nations.
Yeah, always other nations.
Against us. But almost all these war crime things that come up are all designed to take and form a government outside of the United States running the United States.
But it never plays over quite as well in the United States as it does in other countries.
No, it never goes over as well in the United States.
Which is saying something, because it doesn't go over well in other countries.
Now, as you take and you look at how things do go in the other countries, there's certain ones that are under the mistaken impression they're free countries. Canada, Australia, New Zealand,
Britain,
Great Britain. They are all under the mistaken impression they're free countries. And the United States used to be a free country. And they're shocked with the fact that we are the ones that tend to rebel against these mandates and orders. But now, Canada's kicking back.
Yep, and it's spreading. Spreading around the world. The U.S., Austria, New Zealand, Australia, and I'm sure there are other places. I just don't know them off the top of my head.
Well, if you take and you look at the United States and the last numerous presidents we've had, we really have only had one president since Reagan that actually looked after what the America's needs are above other countries.
Yeah.
Reagan was the only one until Trump. Everybody else is more interested in appeasing the communists or the United Nations rather than taking and going forward and actually doing the right thing. They're supposed to be representing us, and instead they represent the communist bloc nations. You had Obama that would always put Cuba above America and any other dictator. It's kind of like Carter. Carter never saw a dictator he didn't like. We can take and go through and say, well, they're just taking and doing what's best for everyone. They're worried about the environment, and they want to take and establish a glorious utopia here on Earth.
Oh, it's kind of ironic, really, how the people who seem to care the most about the environment are the ones who know the least about it.
That's true, and they do the most damage to it. They don't actually care about the environment. They want to make everybody communist. The when
Well, the government, I would agree that's the case. For the individuals, it's often a misguided attempt to be holier than thou.
well, there's a certain degree of that, but I find that most of them, they're communists too.
Yeah.
Um, the communists fled into the environmental movement
Back in the 1940s.
back in the 1940s. So you've got a huge influx of that idea mindset into the environmental movement. They also took and fled into the colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best things that could happen to America would be to shut down our universities and colleges.
Well, I mean, they're killing themselves anyways. So, we may not have to shut down the universities and colleges.
But they've got such a stranglehold on everything. You know, back in the 1800s, if you wanted to be a lawyer, you read for the law, took the bar exam, and you were a lawyer. You didn't go to a university and have them teach you what you should think about the law, rather than teaching you what the law was, which is what happens now. If you wanted to be a doctor, you apprenticed under a doctor and learned how to be a doctor. Nowadays, you go to college for it.
And come out knowing less than the nurses.
Yes, come out knowing less than the nurses.
A lot less, in most cases.
So it's the system isn't designed to educate, it's designed to indoctrinate. Even
And doctor.
You had to be real patient with that joke, didn't you?
and when it comes down to
I didn't want to lose my patience.
like ministers and churches, most of them are being indoctrinated in various colleges too. That's why we see this upsurgence of people coming into various groups that are taking things that the Bible strictly condemns, and they say, well, that's okay now. Because they think they know more than God.
Kind of like what the Pope has been doing.
Mm-hmm.
For millennia.
Well, the current Pope is, he stands for everything that's evil. And the bishops have called him down numerous times. And what gets me is the fact that by nature the office of the Pope is evil, but this guy embodies evil.
Well, remember though, he still hasn't set up his illegitimate son to go conquer Italy yet.
That's true. It's been a long time since the Pope did that.
But there is historical precedent.
Yes, there is. There's historical precedent to the popes taking and establishing a lot of things that they had no business being involved in. But they believed they ruled the world. We look now at the modern society, and is a cabal of billionaires that think they rule the world. And somebody needs to cut them down to size.
But it won't be the politicians.
That's true. It probably won't be the politicians. Because they're in on it.
It'll probably be each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it usually happens.
Well, it's kind of like in the French Revolution. They destroyed all their enemies, and then they turned on each other.
I was more referring to the rise and fall of the East India Companies, plural. Both Dutch and British.
Mm-hmm. And they actually conquered countries and were just companies.
Yeah.
Most powerful companies in the world. Make Microsoft look like it's a little baby.
Yeah, Microsoft and Google think they're something, but they ain't nothing compared to the East India Company.
Either of them.
Yeah. But that is real. They talk about, they condemn capitalism so much. But actually what they are after is mercantilism.
Yeah, they want a repeat of the Banana Wars, really.
Mm-hmm. Wield the government's might against their enemies so they can make more money. Now, Theodore Roosevelt had a general policy that he put out that he wouldn't allow any European country to influence Latin America.
No, that was Monroe. That was the Monroe Doctrine.
That was the Monroe Doctrine, but how Teddy Roosevelt interpreted it was very staunchly on keeping them out. And he's willing to go to war to prevent it. They talk about us becoming a world power back in World War II when actually we were powerful enough to tell the Europe to stay out of South America in the 1800s. And they didn't dare argue with us. Now, I grant you, I don't like us being involved with other countries' business.
Well, it depends. Sometimes another country's business is our business.
Yes, sometimes it is.
Now, thinking about it, isn't America the only country that has ever succeeded in a war across an ocean?
Yes.
No. No,
Which one?
The Falklands.
Oh, yeah, that's right. British in the Falkland Islands.
Yeah.
In the 1980s.
That's true. But they're
but nobody hears about the Falklands. Nobody really.
But they were fighting Brazil? Or Argentina. Yeah, they were fighting Argentina. So they were definitely punching down.
Yeah.
While when we won 2 world wars overseas, and one of which was in a 2-ocean war.
Yeah.
Now, we are the only country to do that.
We took and were punching up because we were taking on the whole world except for a couple allies. And Germany at the time and Japan were considered the world superpowers.
Yeah. And again, they also considered France a superpower before that.
Anyone who considers France a superpower these days needs to relook at their rankings.
Well, when you look at France was a superpower in the 1100s.
Yeah.
1200s maybe. But they haven't been since the 1500s.
Since the Norman conquest.
What do you mean since the 1500s? They were a
England.
superpower in the 1800s.
Nah, well, they were fighting They were fighting the Europeans.
who had some of the most cutting edge militaries in the world
they
at
were
the time.
They were a decent regional power, a world power.
They had to Europe had to create a coalition of almost every remaining European country to drive them off.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And Europe had the most powerful countries in the world aside from us.
That's true. They did. They did have the most powerful countries in the world aside from us. There was a time when China was a world power.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
When countries fall from being world powers, they very rarely rise back up.
There are some notable exceptions, but they're very rare.
They're very rare. There are exceptions, but they are rare. So as we look at it, okay, so they're a world power. Way back when. When Germany invaded them in World War II,
They're at World War II and World War One.
Well, in World War One, they fought back.
They fought back, but they weren't a world power anymore by the end of it. They were too devastated.
They weren't a world power in the beginning of it, taking cavalry charges into machine gun nests.
That's true.
They learned nothing from the modern wars that had been fought before World War One started.
The thing is, we know that Europe sent observers to watch the Civil War.
Yes, they did, and they learned nothing from it. They obviously didn't learn anything from the Boer War either, because that was a modern war.
That thing was vicious.
Or the Spanish-American War.
Which was almost a disaster for us.
A Mexican-American War.
That wasn't a modern war, though.
It was sort of a modern war.
They generally mark the Civil War as the first modern war.
Yeah, the Civil War is classified as the first modern war. Because they had repeating firearms and machine guns.
What about
And incendiary rounds.
the wars with the Sioux in the Dakotas?
That was after the Civil War.
That was after the Civil War, though.
Yeah.
Were they modern wars? Yes. Modern wars against opponents that at the beginning of the battles were inferiorly armed. And
didn't remain that way for long, though.
they didn't remain that way. Thanks to Colt and Winchester, the Indians became better armed than a lot of the cavalry.
And far
so
more
using
motivated
big
to
swords.
actually fight.
Yeah.
They had something worth defending.
Mm-hmm. The notion of, though, well, like Custer's Last Stand. Custer was supposed to have several Gatling guns. But he felt they would slow him down and weren't any use against the Sioux, so he didn't bring them.
He was half right. They would have slowed him down.
Well, he was supposed to unite with two other armies the next day after what was the Battle of the Little Bighorn in order to combine and fight the Sioux.
Yeah.
Instead, he charged in the day earlier because he was in a hurry.
Yeah, he wanted to, he thought it would get him into the White House.
Yes. Now when we look at, well, the opening ups, you've got Spain dropping its restrictions. You've got Great Britain dropping their restrictions.
No, not Great Britain.
Oh, Great Britain hadn't?
It's not so organized.
It's not so...
England and Ireland dropping there. And I believe it's partially Northern Ireland, more the rest of Ireland.
If I recall
And
correctly,
England.
Denmark dropped their restrictions.
Let's see. New Zealand actually dropped one of its restrictions.
And the weird thing is the countries that have actually thrown out their restrictions, COVID rates have plunged.
The U.S. is trickling its drop.
Yes.
Well, that's because it's on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes
If
even
it was
city
up to the
city.
federal government, we'd all still be in lockdown.
Oh yeah, that's because it's easier for them to cheat.
Yeah.
Chicago dropped its mandate.
Really? Chicago?
Yes, Chicago of all places.
Probably because they figured out they couldn't enforce it.
Maybe.
Or
because their economy had plunged.
There was another leftist state that dropped its... Oh, Colorado.
Yeah, but Colorado did that a while ago.
Yeah, but there aren't many leftist states that have actually dropped their mandates.
Yeah, that's true.
And the State Department is still actually has increased its mandates for people coming into the country.
Even though a recent study came out showing that masks had little to no effect.
They've been numerous studies that show that, and
yeah, I know.
they don't pay any attention.
In fact,
to
there
that.
are some studies that say they're detrimental. But
when you figure that now the CDC is saying you need to wear not a woman's stocking over your face to hold the mask in place.
You know, the irony of that is that that was a pretty popular mask to use when robbing banks for a while.
Yes, it was.
That's what immediately came to my mind. Now the CDC is recommending that. And then they'll recommend you carry a gun and enter a bank.
And rob them, yeah. Well, let's face it, in this part of the country, you could wear bandanas for masks when they were enforcing mask mandates. And you look like you're going to stick the place up, you walk into the building.
At the very beginning, when they dropped the mandates and no one had masks yet, I was using a neckerchief.
I don't see how you breathe through that thing.
It's thin.
My neckerchiefs smother me.
Huh.
They're so densely woven. It was...
Maybe they changed the materials they were made out of since then.
Maybe, because mine, it blocked the air. You couldn't breathe.
Huh.
But now my dad's, mine is supposed to be silk, but my dad's actually was silk. I know for a fact it was.
I know mine definitely wasn't. It was some form of weird synthetic plastic thing.
I think mine was kind of a hybrid of the two.
For the audience's consideration, a neckerchief is a piece of traditional naval uniform that was originally worn to keep tar out of your hair and that sort of thing. It is often rolled up and then tied in a square knot around the neck for U.S. sailors in their dress uniforms. It basically is just a large black square of cloth.
Used to be of silk.
Traditionally made out of silk. Nowadays they don't make them like that anymore.
Yeah, but being silk, it was very dense.
Yeah.
And mine is a lot different because of the time periods in which we were both serving.
Yeah.
And it was a major difference. It's interesting. Now you can criticize the Navy.
And oh boy, do I have criticisms.
When we first started this podcast, Josh was active duty still. So we couldn't. He was limited on what he could say. Now he's out.
I'm still limited on what I can say. I'm just not as limited.
Right. Well, technically, I'm still limited on things I can say too, but that's on materials that'll never come up in this podcast.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of what you were limited to say is now in the public record.
Oh, I'm sure some of it is. Some of it's been declassified, but a lot of the equipment hasn't been. Because some of the equipment's still in use.
FCC 100s, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Federal Communication Commissions?
When it comes to equipment and such, and you have a classification, you're not allowed to share information on that equipment. Even if a tech rep in the same position could.
Tech rep, by the way, stands for technical representative. They're basically contractors that are, subcontracted out from a company that made the equipment in the first place to handle issues that they weren't, that the Navy wasn't willing to buy from the company that sold them the equipment. So, like, if there is a part of the equipment that they want to keep the manuals on and sell at a higher price, and the Navy doesn't want to buy it, they can't actually have their people work on it. They have to have a tech rep sent out for it. That is one of my criticisms about the Navy, actually.
When I was in Scotland, they sent a tech rep out, and I had to explain to him how the machine worked.
That's bad.
Oh, my. I am fortunate that I have never had a tech rep that didn't actually know what they were talking about.
You are very fortunate. But basically speaking, when you look at what they're trying to push right now in our country, they are dividing the country into blocks. Those that they consider that matter, and those that are unimportant.
I.e., the kids. That falls under the list of those who aren't important.
Yes. So, if you are somebody in the ones that matter block, then you can get by with violating their rules. But if you're in one of the other blocks, you can't.
There are blocks in place to stop you.
Yes, there are. Now, they're very irritated that people like DeSantis and the Congress in Florida and several other states have taken and passed laws that limit what the federal government can do. And one problem is that people view the federal government as being this all-powerful device, while in actuality, the federal government is not supposed to be weaker than the state governments. The state government's the ones that's actually supposed to run the country.
Yeah.
The federal government are for overlapping situations like commerce and defense and that
mediating disputes.
And mediating disputes between the states. Now, there should be some things that are listed constitutionally as being sacrosanct, that you can't, even the states aren't supposed to violate. Second Amendment's one of them. The First Amendment's one of them. But
basically the entire Bill of Rights.
The entire Bill of Rights. The federal government and the state governments are not supposed to be violating the Bill of Rights. They do it all the time, but they're not supposed to. It's interesting that in times past, you could have walked through downtown New York City with a gun in your pocket, and no police officer could say a thing to you. And they wouldn't have said anything to you. It was considered totally acceptable. Now, you have one hidden away and locked in a cupboard or a safe in your apartment, and they can haul you off to jail. Where's the freedom?
Well, we are starting to peter out, and we're about 30 seconds away from an hour, so...
Would you like to close this?
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode, and we hope you liked it. Feel free to stop by for another one.